Welcome to the Be Meaningful podcast, an unrehearsed, unscripted conversation about a real brand in real time, with Brian and Bogey, the founders of Meaningful, an agency that helps brands find a meaningful place in the world. Today we meet with Albert Owusu-Asare, who, aside from having a very cool name, is co-founder of a Fintech called Cadana that offers companies a payroll infrastructure designed for emerging markets like Ghana, where Albert was born. Brian and Bogey discuss how to balance this rich origin story with all the necessary product messaging.
We've taken a look at Cadana. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah.
Cadana.
Okay.
So we've done some homework. We've had take a look at it. We've also have some experience with competitors, right? Well, what we would call competitors. We don't know if they're actually our competitors, but it would be great to start off, but kind of like if you give like a couple sentences, like what is Cadana? What are you doing? You have a whole compelling story, which we can get to later in the episode. But yeah, like just give me a quick one-liner. What is this, and why is it important and relevant today?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me on. Cadana is a remote work payroll business, and what makes us compelling is we specialize, especially in emerging markets. Okay, so most of the platforms out there are very good, right, when it comes to Europe, Australia, the usual places, right? But it breaks down when it comes to places like Nigeria, Bangladesh, Latin America. And so we just said we're going to specialize in those niche areas and then create a lot of value for our businesses and our talent.
That's cool. And that's kind of personal, right? Because of you and your partner, right?
Yeah, it is.
Cool. Yeah.
It is. I'm from Ghana. He is from Pakistan. And you know, I can get into the story, but we feel particularly optimistic, right, about the folks that are from where we're from. I don't know if you all have worked with anyone from Africa, for example. They tend to be the most cheerful, hardworking, exciting people to work with, and we just think it makes sense that they have the same experience when it comes to getting paid.
That's cool. Yeah. And so if you didn't do what you're doing, how does that work now? Is the system for getting paid convoluted? Is it corrupt? Is it difficult? It seems like one of the things you're doing by streamlining this and baking in the compliance that it really makes entry right into an emerging market like turnkey, super easy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. And look, just to be candid, a lot of the big platforms out there, they look at the P&L, say, where are the revenues coming from? Where should we put our efforts? And oftentimes the emerging markets tend to be sort of the tail end of their volumes. And so what they do is they just either just toss their hands in the air and say, we're not going to even explore some parts with the emerging markets. Sometimes they say, we're just given quite not up to par experience. But what happens is that they're missing out. The space is becoming very, very competitive. And the emerging markets are also kind of complicated, right? So how do you remit, taxes in Kenya? What does the statutory labor laws in Pakistan look like? And so where we come in is we go to these platforms and we say, you can give the same experience, right, to workers, irrespective of whether they're in Amsterdam or in Nairobi. And we are just going to be sort of that infrastructural layer to allow you to scale and expand into these markets. And so one of the ways that I want you to think about us is we're not in direct competition with some of the big names you might imagine out there. We're actually enabling them. So think of us as almost like a Stripe, right, for that entire sector.
Wow. I love that you said Stripe. Me and Brian were looking at the site. And again, I've had a chance to work with Deal, and I've had a chance to work with Remote. And I looked at your guys' site and I'm like, they're not the same. Those guys are kind of like all encompassing like platform. Like Deal, for example, is a little bit more transactional. Remote is like this full on HR platform. But you guys really, like, the first thing that came to mind, and I told this to Brian, is like they look like a Stripe. They look like they're doing a Stripe play where they come in and are really first addressing like the primary audience is developers. It's let's provide them an API, let's integrate into the systems that they're using, and then let them build above that. And then, and to your point, I guess that's basically infrastructure for these bigger platforms to then be able to come in and utilize you guys for these specific markets.
100%. Yeah. One of the untold secrets in the payroll space, especially let's just say in the US, is all these companies are building on top of primitives that you've never heard of. There's a company called Symmetry Software. They basically power payroll for everyone you can think about, right? So they have actually codified the rules in this state, in this county, and everybody else is building the user experiences. And so the question we asked ourselves were, who is building that for, the 150 plus countries around the world? Right. When you want to start out as a deal competitor, are you going to go around and create legal entities around the world? Or do you wish you could just call an API that told you the gross to net calculations of these countries, right? And so we're just thinking about what those primitives are. And those primitives are compliance, their payroll, payments, their FX, their benefits, and how can we actually make it in a developer-friendly way to enable these folks to scale quickly. So the verdict is yet to be seen to kind of how this will play out, but we think that a Stripe for that entire sector deserves to be there, and we think we're going to be the leaders to do that.
Yeah, that's well, cool. Somebody's bullish enough. They gave you money, so right? Somebody sees what you see.
Yeah, right? yeah. And the bet is basically, look, demographics in the West are decreasing, right? The Western populations are aging, and guess what? Right. The opposite is happening in emerging market. And so 10, 15 years from now, the entire global workforce is likely going to be powered by these folks. And so it's a long-term journey. And what our investors are investing in is just that, hey, these guys are going to build those rails. They're going to be the experts in those markets. And very soon when it takes off, they're going to be the emerging leaders. And so we hope they're right. And then we hope we're right. But that's the thesis so far.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that emerging market, that was the sense I got, is kind of the idea of like early adoption, getting established, being in place, and then as more and more economy is housed in these markets, you're gonna ride that because you've been in there.
Yep.
Who would Bogey? I'm sorry if I cut you off. Not really, because I do it all the time. But in front of a guest, in front of a new person, I'm going to say I'm sorry. Who would be, like, who's an ideal customer? Like, who would it be? Who would somebody be in this country that kind of like the light bulb goes off when you say you can be in place, functioning, highly functioning in an emerging market like Ghana or whatever, or Nigeria? Like, who would jump at that when that proposition is put in front of them?
100%. So the way we look at the market is we have a thesis for the direction the market is going, but I'm going to talk about now. Today, we focus on talent marketplaces as our first kind of ideal customer profile. And so we're not yet public with some of our customers, but we power experiences for some of the world's largest talent marketplaces. And just to use as an example, the likes of Upwork, Fiverr, those are not customers. Those will be ideal customers. But we go in and we tell them, look, if there's a reason why you haven't gone into some of these markets, and the reason was just a lack of infrastructure, we're there to help you. So we're focusing a lot on those marketplaces. But in terms of like our view, we think that payroll just as a feature is going to be a lot more embedded than people think today. So for example, if you're users of like, Brex or Mercury or any of these financial services companies, it's not too crazy to say at some point in the future, there's going to be a tab that says payroll. And you're going to go there and you're going to have an experience and you can pay your remote workers around the world. Now, Brex is not in the business of payroll. How are they going to do that, right? They're going to want to invoke APIs and infrastructure to allow them to do that. Bill.com, etc., right? Think about even big multinational banks, Citibank, JP Morgan, Chase. If they want to add these capabilities, they're going to want to build on some infrastructure. And so we think that the TAM is actually pretty big. And we think that as payroll becomes ubiquitous, that infrastructure is going to be needed. Just like how Stripe helped everybody embed payments, we want to help everyone embed payroll.
Well, another example is also like Chase and Zelle, right?
Yeah.
Chase and Zelle, what a great partnership for them to be able to utilize
Well,
this mobile.
They
right?
made it.
Right.
It was a consortium of banks that made Zelle. I mean, it was they were part of that.
Right.
Right.
Let me ask you this. So we like to talk about branding. We like to talk about messaging, positioning, and there's one message toward investors.
Yeah.
But there's a different message toward consumers or clients, the prospects. And so what's interesting is you have three things on your website. So the three things that kind of highlight, right? You have white label, payments, and wallet. Now, one of the three is not the same, right? One of the three doesn't match. And wallet seems very much almost like I don't say consumer, because that's the wrong word to use, but it's on the user end as opposed to be on the end. So is there a reason for that? Help us understand kind of the why those three. And
yeah. So that's a great point. The way we think about our brand, or the way that we want to position ourselves, is it's all about the talent experience. It's the human that is getting paid and the experiences that they're having. So before we showed up, a random person in Africa is receiving their salary through Swift. What that means is that when payroll is run, their friend in Amsterdam gets paid instantly. They have to wait 5 to 7 business days to get their salary. They also lose anywhere between 5 and 6% in fees of just getting paid of the work that they have done. And so we're branding ourselves a little bit as the platform that's actually on the side of the user, and we're putting them first in everything that we're doing. So when you think about payments, you think about wallets, like you mentioned, it's how do we do beyond just getting paid? Payroll has been, hey, Brian, I'm just going to push $5,000 to your Wells Fargo. But in emerging markets, there's a bigger opportunity. I can push that money to a wallet, and I can embed FX services, virtual cards, ability for you to cash out into crypto. And so that is the angle as well when we think about the consumer or the user experiences. So we're leading with that. And then we're saying, look, you don't have to build any of this stuff from scratch. You can just literally white label our entire platform and you're good to go.
But you're painting a picture of this user like payee experience, which is great, but you're really messaging that to the payor.
Correct.
Right. So it's kind of that's interesting, because while I see all the pieces, I see the infrastructure and I see the payments, and now we understand the wallet, it seems like the messaging just falls a little short of if I'm going to expand into a market and there's going to be payroll, it's about establishing, I don't want to say the most ethical, but the most optimal payroll approach.
Yeah.
Right. I would feel good. I would feel good about that. Right. Because it doesn't change anything on my end, whether I do it with you guys or I do it some other convoluted way. But knowing that I've really set up like the optimal infrastructure for the people that I'm now employing.
Yeah.
Like that would make me feel good. Is there more of a benefit than that? Because it's kind of like the benefit I could see is profound for the person receiving money, payroll.
Yes.
But how do you make it a must-have and not a nice-to-have for the people who are paying the money?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important observation. And our general approach, for example, with the website and ourselves, is we're definitely very agile. And so the version of the website you're seeing is actually, I think, about 2 weeks old, and we're always experimenting.
Oh, nice.
Sure.
But one of the big things that we found that actually resonates a lot with the buyer is risk, right? And compliance risk, right? And so a lot of these buyers are not trying to get sued when they terminate someone wrongly. They're not trying to break some law that they didn't know was even there. And so we
Right.
kind of lead a little bit with that, and we lead with, even if you were using, without us, right, you're probably using a fragmented set of providers. You go to Brazil, you find an expert there. You go to Egypt, you find another expert there, and you can make it work. But you end up with 30 different experts.
It's all ad hoc and
spreadsheets, email. And so there's still a lot of risk in that. And so we kind of lead with that, when we're in front of the buyer. And then we basically sprinkle on top the talent experience, which is sort of the icing on the cake. But we're trying different things, and I'm sure the messaging for our website, for example, will get there.
Well, one thing I'm seeing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I'm seeing is you kind of have these three verticals, and maybe that's too condensed, right? But you do have these three different verticals. You have kind of the payer, you have the person receiving the money, and then maybe the very end consumer, right? The end user, and that could be both. But let's assume that one is a business owner and one is an employee, right?
And IT, whoever's going to build,
right?
Like you said, the developer,
the most important, right? The developer, right? So what happens is, what we like to do typically in our case is we like to build sites that are very focused on the audience, right? So instead of focusing kind of everything together, you have very different subsites. So either subsites or different landing pages, but it's very focused on the different audiences. And so once you go down the ladder, one easy solution is, or one approach you could take a look at, is you can have, multiple languages on these different sites, right? They're even targeting a completely different person when you think about it, right? And so that, as opposed to having very focused of just the developers and that's it, and then you kind of have everything mixed in a little bit, it's good. But then what happens is it allows you to be very focused on how you're speaking to who and what will help them essentially convert. Right.
Well, and when the language is tailored to a certain vertical, if you will, then that language is richer in terms of search, right? So, like we work with a data center, very green, sustainable data center design that's very different than all the data centers out there, and so certainly. ESG and green is important, but so is the fact that it can be built on an acre of land instead of needing 200 acres for a hyperscale.
Right.
So you're going to want to talk to developers and investors. You're going to want to talk to municipalities. You're going to want to talk, so there's a lot of different people that really aren't going to come from the same place. And so having different pages, one for sustainability, one for municipalities, one for, that kind of thing. And so I think what Bogey's saying is you could consider having a site basically for developers or people that are building. Yeah, you could have a site for the wallet, right? Yeah, or a landing page for the wallet, and that way they all really are housed in the same website, but when people get to them, they come straight to that landing page, which is part of the site.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The whole time you're talking, I'm thinking like how, not to make it like a bleeding heart thing, but this is so personal, right? Because it's your origin, it's where you guys are from, and so I'm wondering, like, did a light bulb go off? Was it a slow burn? Did you finally just see, like, God, there's really nothing that really addresses these markets. We should, there's a space, there's an opportunity, right? Because one of the beautiful things about, this is in a McKinsey report from 2014, and I hung on to it. These two guys wrote a quarterly report, and they said the beauty of capitalism is its ability to address needs, to be innovative, to be creative, right? And really, like, no economic system is as good as capitalism in addressing needs and finding solutions, right? And so this is like textbook example of that, right? For you guys. And I think while it's kind of relegated to about us or the founders or the team, it's kind of like, I think people get fired up and it really becomes truly a narrative, which people we're wired for stories, and people see like, and even if I'm not going to use you, I'm rooting for you, right? Because I see what you're doing. And I want you to succeed. And I think that emotional response is really, I mean, branding, that's all branding really is emotion, right? It's like you have an emotional response when you see or hear a name. And how does that happen? It happens over time. You begin to associate feelings for that name or that brand or that logo, and how does that happen? It doesn't real, like, I don't know if I don't like Stripe is well known, but I don't know, like when I hear that name, I don't have an emotional response to it. So it's ubiquitous and it's known.
Well, it's very utilitarian. That's the biggest problem.
It's not a strong brand. It's not a strong brand in terms of emotion,
Right.
And so I wonder, kind of what you're doing. I'm kind of rambling, but that's what I do, kind of bouncing around. But, I know years ago, right? What was it? Ferrari, one of the Ferrari heirs, he bought Puma, and then he invested in the African teams and goes like, you know what? Let Adidas have Europe, let Nike have North America. I'm going after Africa, and then Nigeria, right? They had like a couple of World Cups. They had a formidable team, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's a good move. He got in early. It's an emerging market. And it kind of, I don't know if it's really developed the way he thought, but it's similar in that somebody looked at a continent like Africa and said, I want to be there when this takes off. Right. And you guys are kind of doing that too, right?
Yeah. And I think it's really compelling, kind of the framework you are explaining, and maybe I'll call it like purposeful capitalism or something like this. But
there you go.
It's just this idea that when we started out, just to give you that light bulb moment, I came to the U.S. 17 years old, first time on a plane. I got a scholarship to Iowa, of all places, for college, and basically from that I was able to go over to New York. I worked at Goldman Sachs for about 5 years. Similarly, my co-founder Amir from Pakistan, he went to Deutsche Bank. But for the last, let's call it a decade, we've been working within the American system, which has been great. But we said, what can we do? We wanted to do a little bit of something with a little bit more purpose. And so for us, it was still crystallizing, but this is my second startup. I was a CTO of another startup, and we scaled it from 0 to like $1 billion and over in valuation. But I used to hire from all over the world, like, Latin America, Africa. And these were incredible folks. And they were telling me, hey, please, I'm going to go get a PayPal account from my aunt, or, hey, I have this, relative that has a Bank of America bank, put it in there. And it was just such a mess. And so for me, it was the emotional responses. There's this big injustice I felt of just the same, skilled people. And just because of their geography and their location, they're not able to have the same pay experiences, right? And then the second light bulb was, oh my goodness, forever we've been talking about some of these places from the context of aid and, helping them and basically handouts. And here we are with a phenomena of very young people, ambitious, that can actually earn, and those dollars can go into that economies. And the average person we know now, a remote worker in Africa, takes care of 5 people in their families, right? And so those two things combined was just like, A, it's a huge opportunity. There's hundreds of millions of them. And B, we can actually have a lot of purpose by building an experience that makes it well. And so it's not just a feel good kind of a thing. It's really just like there's money to be made, and there's something broken, and we can actually combine purpose with capitalism in that very unique way. If that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, and it's great to hear because we have a lot going on right now based on shareholder capitalism, right? Which has had a 50-year run after the Milton Friedman op-ed, right? And It's created this rapacious form of capitalism, this strip mining mentality, which is it's all wealth extraction.
Sure.
You call people human capital, and then when you use it up, you discard it and you move on. It's all for margin, and it's all for shareholder value. And while of course there needs to be good margin and there needs to be profit and shareholder value, when profit isn't the fruit of a good company, when it's the purpose of the company, something happens and it loses its humanity, its compassion, it loses its virtue, And I think what you're talking about is, I've never liked the name stakeholder capitalism, but the hope is there's an evolution of capitalism that is not at odds with doing good and social justice. You can still make a profit, and being able to do those things in balance where what you're really doing. See, this is an example. I mean, probably it's more vivid because we're talking about money, right?
Right.
But the idea of wealth, instead of wealth extraction, it's a 180-degree paradigm shift to wealth creation, right? So
100%.
Yeah, you're creating wealth for yourself, but you're also creating wealth for the person who's taking care of 5 people in their town, in their village. And so that's a virtue circle, right? And you can keep expanding the benefit while making a profit, while making money, while doing good. I think this is the hope, that these models prove themselves and it begins to shift what, baby boomers have largely established as shareholder capitalism, which there's just a lot of roadkill,
right,
for that. So anyways, that was my little pep talk, but
I love it. Yeah. The challenge of, I think, creating a very technical product, aka APIs, selling to developers, and yet also emphasizing the humanness of what that product is supposed to do, I think is the game that we are going to iterate and try to solve, right? So, I mean, what are your thoughts or experiences with such a situation?
Well, that's exactly, if I were to say anything, I think it's not just about like, oh, it'd be nice to elevate, or a little more about your origin story and why you're doing this and all that. I think it's really, nowadays, like, websites have to be first and foremost functional. Like, I need to be able to find what I'm looking for. But I think there's, and let me think how to explain this. So anything that you experience in the digitized world that's a pleasant user experience sets the standard for everything else. So it's not within categories. Like, so if I look at banking or finance or a payroll API, I'm not looking at that differently than I look at what I'm doing on my phone for personal. Like, if the UI is easy and it clicks and it's like, wow, I just ordered a pizza, I want to do that with everything, right? So the bar is set universally, and like banks, largely because of the financial laws and rules, but banks were way behind in terms of having a pleasant user experience, right? And I think in a similar way, when people go to a website, they're used to consuming so much content on their phone and online now, that there's an expectation that a website is a little more editorial. It's a little more like, I don't want to say like a magazine, but it's a little more like media. Like if I go look at the New York Times, or I look at NPR, or I go to The Economist or something, I'm getting news. It's functional, but there's an, like, I'm falling into stories, and I'm clicking and reading and going to backstories and clicking a link inside that story and looking at something else. So now there's an element of entertainment or education going on. And I think even though like right now your website, it's very clean and it's nicely designed, but it doesn't have any of these human benefits
Right.
That you're talking about. And so for me, if I were like an editorial, if I were to see somebody who might be receiving money in Africa or in Pakistan or in Brazil or something, like if I were to, not stories, but if I were to visualize that, so I begin to have an emotional response to the benefit. I think it can be a combination of the two things. Very clearly, it's technical. It's, kind of like sometimes Google, I mean, they have a ton of money, right? But sometimes Google will do that where it's almost like an infomercial. They're explaining how this feature works, but it's done within a human interest story.
Right. Right.
And I think a little more of that, so that I kind of come alongside you emotionally, like cheering you on to succeed. I think that could happen in the website. And that for me, it's such a great story,
Well, I also I think because I'm a big structure guy. I love structure and organization. From a structure end, at the very top, you want to be very clear. Why do you matter? Why do you exist as an organization, right? And that is very high level. It's very vision level. But then you quickly need to get down to the next level, which is utility. Like, okay, well, I'm speaking to developers. I'm speaking to enterprises. I'm speaking to remote workers, right?
Right.
And so at that point, you have to start off with the big vision. Why do you exist? Why do you matter? And that fields in the stories. Video is always a great fun. If you can utilize video is a great way to communicate, to do storytelling. And if you can bring in a real case study, that's even better. Because here's how we're doing with these guys. Here's what we're doing with them. Here's how they put in this technology to use. But then quickly you want to get down to the product. And then when it comes to product, it's interesting how people think. Some people want to know the features, right? From a developer perspective. Some people want to know the solution. How does this actually solve my problem? And so even looking at Stripe does a solid job when they have, here's the ecosystem. And I think I would argue that's your biggest challenge. Outside of being able to say, here's why we matter, here's why we exist, here's the massive vision of what we're doing. The second challenge for you is, here's the breadth of this. It's a full ecosystem. Not only are we doing the API on one end, right, working with developers to be able to integrate this within your software, but we also have the wallet and the virtual cards. Holy crap! That alone can be a product, right? And there's plenty of out there, right? Wallets, they have full organizations that are just devoted to wallets, but you have this whole ecosystem, and your ecosystem is focused on emerging markets. And I think the second challenge is really articulating that ecosystem. And why is that important? I think that's important because of buy-in. You want people to say, okay, this is cool, this is legit, they have the full spectrum, it's worth my time investing. And that's from both end, from consumer end, but also from a developer end. In the developer world, this. So many new technologies. People are always coming out with new frameworks, new this, new that. 6 months later, it's depreciated. No one's looking at it. And so being able to understand that it's worth my investment into this ecosystem because it's going to be around, and that's very important, I think, for developers.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And especially the way you thought about it, you broke it down into the structures. One of the things that we were hoping or aiming to do with this iteration of the website is that infrastructure aspect coming out, because that's what we are. But you got on a call and you're just like, hey, at some point I thought you were just like these other payroll software providers. And so the other version before this was kind of just very, I would say, vague. It was just payroll in emerging markets or something like that. But I don't know what that is. Is just a software as a Series A startup? Do I sign up, or are you selling to platforms, or are you selling to? And so that infrastructure piece for us needed to come out, and it needed to be very clear. And I think in trying to do so, maybe we've sacrificed a little bit of the story and all of that as well. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And this is why I said in the beginning, where you're speaking to different audiences. I think you, again, I don't know, this is my gut feeling here. You've been speaking a lot to investors. And the way you speak to investors, you got to use the words that they understand. Payroll, done. They understand payroll. But you're so much bigger than payroll. And so the first thing you said, I think I have it wrote down, remote work payroll business for emerging markets. Beautiful. For investors, that's wonderful. But you're so much bigger to everyone else, to developers, to remote workers. And so being able to shift the way you speak to the world, I think that's kind of an important step. I don't know, Brian, you were going to say something.
I just think there's an emotional element that would just kind of complete the package, you know? And it's not so much, and I think you even use, it's not a bleeding heart story. That would be kind of a facile play, right? That's not
you're
what
not
we're
a
talking
nonprofit.
about.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But you're putting your bet on these emerging markets because that's where things are going. And I think that's what's charismatic about your brand, right? And I think that's when people catch that, then they know why you exist, what you're about, and then they can file all the information, right?
The challenge with us, and I think products similar to ours, is that there's a little bit of education that is even needed on the buyer side of why are you not in the market? Is that because you don't have the infrastructure? Is that because you just don't think that it's worth it? And so that's the nature of just where we are. It's just, hey, look, there are a lot of software engineers from Nigeria. Did you even know that? Do you want to service them as a talent marketplace? So that education piece is also kind of hard because the buyers naturally do not know that this solution exists. And you want to basically get that through quickly without beating about the bush about who you are as well. So those are the things that we're figuring out.
Right. No, that's interesting because when I hear you say that, like software engineers, so it's a little more of the gig economy where you hire talent as opposed to it's a business plan. Like, now, do I even want to go into this market? Well, that's a bigger decision. It involves a lot more people. And now you're way up in the C-suite trying to like sell an API. You're like that. And I think to your point, this is like, because there are business models. I know, like in production and digital development and animation, the business model that has taken over is sending a project around the world. Like it's 24 hours, it's being worked on. And so other companies that are brick and mortar, they can't compete. They're folding because they can't compete. Even animation, like Pixar, is challenged because there's animation happening by a gig economy going around the planet. And somebody's working on it in every time zone all day, every day, 7 days a week. And
it gets passed down, right? It gets passed down
as
the sun goes.
And so a little bit of that idea that there's untapped potential in a gig economy construct is certainly more downstream. It's an easier play than if you're trying to talk to a company like, hey, did you even realize? Because now it's like you're working for the country of Nigeria, economic development. You're like, you might as well be an ambassador. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work, And well, this is cool, and it would be nice to have Nigeria, to have money coming in that isn't what is it? The petroleum companies coming in and just lighting their harbor on fire and then leaving when there's nothing left. Shareholder capitalism, case in point.
Case in point, and the resource here not being gold or oil, but really being people. I think it's the biggest underrated assets of the continent, if I may. So that is the hypothesis, right, around our business. is that those continents will be better in the future, not because of the natural resources, but because of the people, basically.
So that's a great story. You need to be somewhere. You need to get on the right podcast and say those kind of things, whether it's, I don't know, an economist podcast or something like that. You should
honestly
do that.
Yeah. We should connect them with Tess. That'd be great. Because we have a good PR firm we work with. They're based in New York, and that's what they do. They get founders and entrepreneurs basically in front of the right people from a earned media perspective.
Yeah, and that's the right venue to say the things like you just said. That sometimes trying to put those up on the top of your website, it kind of starts to bury the information I might need on the website. But then you can work in parallel and be saying things that are kind of more elevated and higher vision and long term, and they complement. So that's cool.
Exactly. And which is why I was excited when you said, hey, let's record a podcast, because we're finding that the longer form sort of things like this helps really tell the story. And it's, and it's very hard to do that on a website, for example, when you really want it to be functional for people to get what they need. Yeah. So that's a dual strategy internally for us.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the other reason. That's another good reason, I think, to lean into like case studies or maybe some white papers, because leaning that, and that's a whole other branch of the website, basically resources. Here's a real world case. Here's how people are using it. I know with some clients, what we've done in the past is we would go out and record videos. It would be just like a video. It would be something simple as like 60 seconds to maybe 3 minutes max. And it's just like, here's a prospect, a client that we've worked with. Here's their story. Here's how the software and solution, the technology helped their business or.
I'm rooting for you. I can feel it happening. Like when I listen to your story. So I think you got there's just a ton of potential in your story, as long as it's told from a really like wide-eyed, savvy business person,
Right.
And then the emotional can be part of that. But it's like, wow, this is like, nobody's thinking about this because everybody's just going for the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
And I think there's something kind of cool and charismatic that you guys are kind of going after these emerging markets, because there's a ton of opportunity and a ton of good, 100%. and you're going for both. And so hats off to you, man. That's a great story. And I think as, the boomers start to give way to millennials, that's going to be the measure of a business, is that can it get that balance of doing something really good while it does well,
100%.
That's my hope anyways.